Welcome to World Travel Made Easy with Itinerary Boss, the podcast for busy professionals who want to plan unforgettable trips without the stress. If you're craving adventure, relaxation, or cultural immersion, but feel overwhelmed where to start, this is the show for you. Each week, we dive into travel tips, expert strategies, and actionable advice to help you save time, money, and hassle while helping you design your dream trip. From group getaways to romantic escapes to adventure packed journeys and budget friendly tips, we cover it all. I'm Ross, your host and travel enthusiast, with over a decade of experience balancing a demanding career while also planning trips to over 25 cities in Europe, all over the US, Central America, the Caribbean, and beyond. I've mastered the art of stress free planning, and I'm here to help you do the same. If you love what you hear, don't forget to follow the show, leave us a review, as well as share it with a fellow traveler. I want to make your next adventure the easiest and most memorable yet. Now, on with the show. Welcome to another episode of World Travel Made Easy with Itinerary Boss. I'm excited to have on this week's episode Glen Flanagan from Fortune. I got the chance to meet Glen from one of our previous guests, Caroline Lapini, and really excited to dive into more credit card travel strategies as well as personal finance. How's it going, Glenn?
It's going great, Russ. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to talk credit card rewards with you today.
Yeah, man, me too. And it's always good to connect with someone who went to, some people know, but some people don't know, Radford University, little small college, both of our alma maters, as well as someone who's local in Charlotte. That always makes me excited to have these conversations. And I don't want to, right, give your introduction because I'll sell you short. Would you mind just introducing yourself and a little bit of background about what you've been up to and what you got going on?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a deputy editor on the Fortune Personal Finance team. I cover everything from credit card rewards to mortgage rates to what the Federal Reserve is doing. So it keeps me busy. I've been in personal finance specifically since about 2019. Before that, I had a background in newspaper journalism. As you mentioned, I'm a proud Highlander. It was great to connect with you over that. Honestly, anytime I meet anybody from Virginia Tech, I have to needle them a little bit because there's that Tech Bradford rivalry. I tell them, I'm going to try not to hold that against you too much. You've been a Hokie.
That's funny. Yeah, I think I had a lot of friends who went to tech, and for a good time, they'd always come to Radford. But then we're like, all right, we don't really have many sports to offer. We might make the NCAA tournament, in the first four, and then get smacked by 30 or 40 in that first round. But it's always a good time, and yeah, there's definitely that friendly competition for sure. And you know it
Oh,
too,
yeah.
being from Southwest Virginia originally.
Oh, yeah, yeah. It's in good faith. And honestly, I've got slightly conflicted loyalties in terms of the college sports because, of course, with the Highlanders, we got a stellar basketball team that we root for, but no football team. So, we got to root for the Hokies just by proximity. And being from Southwest Virginia, of course, we're very proud of Frank Beamer and what he did for them.
Yeah, for sure. Unless you count club football, which all my buddies played on, but that I wouldn't want to see them playing on a D1 field, that's for sure.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah.
Well, cool, man. Well, I want to dive in. I know when you and I got the chance to meet up and have a first conversation, we were going back and forth on credit card rewards, right? Personal finance, mortgages, everything that you mentioned. So I'm really excited for this conversation because it's not only around travel, with my personal background, but around investing, personal finance, right? Real estate investing. So we nerded out then, and I'm
We
excited
did.
to dive into this. But I would just love to learn a little bit more, right? We've talked about Radford. We've talked about, you're now at Fortune, but just a little bit more about your journey on the personal finance journalism front, and then what really drew you into focusing in on credit cards and rewards.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I mentioned, I started out in newspaper journalism, and I came up through a couple of small newspapers, covered everything from fishing rodeos to public safety trends to city council. You're a little bit of a jack of all trades on that scene, and I was always a little bit of a personal finance nerd. Just myself, got into credit card cashback probably back in college. Got my first Discover cashback card. Got into it in a more professional way in 2019. I took a job at Lending Tree, and the editor that I reported to, she really liked my reporting background, liked my research chops, and she was willing to train me up in things like credit card rewards, issuer application rules, all of those details that, as folks in the credit card space, we know so well. I was with Lending Tree for about 3 years. Spent some time with Forbes Advisor after that, and I've been with Fortune, gosh, a little over a year now. Time really does fly.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. And yeah, I think a lot of times, I mean, it is right. Like you lucked out because you went to Lending Tree, you started to learn more of the professional aspect, right? Learn the back ends. But if you're not in that job or in that industry, right? A lot of times you aren't going to know kind of all the nuances that go into it. So you have to, like you and I were talking about, like you kind of have to have your head in the sand and be doing those type of things, whether it's right trying to do real estate investing, whether it's investing, right? Whether it's if you're traveling and trying to figure out what the best credit card is, or right, if like similar to you, discover credit card in college, right? I thought, oh, credit's bad. You want to only have, right? You want to use your debit card. My first credit card was a Barclay World Mastercard Arrival, which had, $0 annual fee, kind of learned the ropes there. And then started to travel more, learn those. But yeah, I mean, if you're not really understanding a lot of that, a lot of the time you're at service level. That's why I love doing these interviews because I get to bring on experts like yourself and some other colleagues from Forbes and Fortune to really share a lot of that knowledge with others in less than an hour's time frame. So it's great. So I
Absolutely.
appreciate you sharing that. I guess just on that note, are there common misconceptions? I know I talked about me in college, but a lot of people I feel like credit's bad, right? Dave Ramsey's hammered it into their head and they're scared.
Mm,
Which I think there's right there's definitely very good things about live below your means, budgeting, all of that. Like that's step one, get the foundation
mm.
right. But for those people who have the foundation right and they're like, okay, I do want to travel a little bit. What do you feel like some of those common misconceptions are about credit cards, and like how do you like to address those when you're talking to people?
Yeah, absolutely. Russ, you make a good point about a lot of folks come into this with the mindset that credit is bad, it's dangerous. And sometimes that's for very good reason. I think some of us grew up seeing family members with too much credit card debt. It weighed them down, and so there's sort of a healthy skepticism of these products. That said, I do think there's some misconceptions. For one thing, you don't need to take on debt to build credit, and building credit can be immensely helpful. My wife and I just bought a home. There's no way we would have been able to do that without having our credit in good shape. Got a decent rate on our mortgage. So credit can make your life a lot easier as long as you're intentional about it. So one of the things I would say is you do not need to take on debt to build credit history. You can get a secured credit card. You can keep the limit low if you're worried about the risk of overspending, and you can put an automated charge on there and set up auto pay. You can set your Netflix to bill to that card every month. You can set up auto pay. You never have to take on debt, and boom, there's credit history just building for you. Sort of similar, I would say you don't have to carry a balance to build credit. I've had folks who had that misconception. I've had to talk to them and say, no, actually, you can pay it off as soon as the statement hits. You don't need to carry a balance. In fact, you shouldn't carry a balance because when you do, you're probably incurring interest charges. So as long as you're making a charge and you're paying it off, that's getting reported to the credit bureaus with the vast majority of cards. That's getting reported to the credit bureaus, and you are building positive credit history. So I would just say, as long as you're intentional about it, you don't need to take on debt to use credit cards to better your financial profile.
Yeah, no, perfectly well said. And obviously, you're the expert here, so I appreciate you answering that. And I mean, that's a lot of the times where people have that hesitancy. They want to open one card and only use that one card and think, oh, I can't have another. Where it may be, and like for example, I've over the years from a travel perspective have strategically outlined which credit cards do I want to use for the time of season it may be, right? If we're going on a honeymoon, or we're going to these specific hotels, having those ones specifically. But, for example, there was one that was a that had that I just wanted to use 0% annual fee. And at the time of the season, wanted to use, the 0% APR and just wanted to use that just for a month or two. And from there, then paid that off. And then the nice thing now is, like you said, that's on Spotify, Netflix. It has a $10, $12 charge a month. And that's building up credit because I'm automatically paying that. And I think a lot of people too, one misconception is not just paying the minimum balance, making sure you pay the statement balance. Because if you,
Hmm.
that's kind of where, and we'll kind of dive into this a little bit more, but if you get credit cards for travel and then you use all that, and then say you get, 100,000 points, but then you have, $5,000 on your statement balance and you only pay that $50 minimum balance, you're then probably getting whatever that is, 20, 30% interest where it's really
Right.
outweighing. So I think it's people understanding it's not the minimum balance, it's the statement balance, and always focusing on that and making sure that people have that understanding as well.
Absolutely. And you may even be able to look at your credit card statement and find a place on the statement that shows you if you only pay the minimum balance, here's how long it's going to take you to pay that off. And that's sobering, or at least it is to me.
It is.
So
Yeah.
you're exactly right. You never want to pay just the minimum if you can afford to pay more. You absolutely want to treat your credit card like cash. Only spend what you can afford to pay off immediately. Pay that statement balance in full. That way, thanks to your credit card's grace period, in the bulk of cases, you should be able to avoid interest charges.
Yeah. Yeah. No, very, very well said. What about, I mean, when people are starting to dive into credit card rewards, are there mistakes that you see or, a couple common questions that you get right off the bat?
Yeah, one thing that I've seen that I would sort of caution against is sometimes folks get excited about this and they kind of apply haphazardly. And you want to be thoughtful, you want to be strategic, right? Because each application is what's called a hard inquiry on your credit report. And some issuers and some cards are friendlier to folks with newer credit profiles, and some really want you to have a well-established history. And so if you're new to this and you're applying for some really premium cards right out the gate, you might be getting some hard inquiries on your report that just end up as denials. And so there's no benefit to you from that. So just being thoughtful, taking the time to research what cards fit with my financial profile, what do I have a realistic chance at getting approved for. Some of the issuers have pre-approval tools where you can check that. And if you're pre-approved, look, it's not guaranteed, but it does tell you I've got a pretty good shot at that. So being thoughtful about what you apply for and where you are in your financial life cycle when you apply, I think that can really set you up for success.
Yeah, yeah, and one thing that, when I first started, it was when I was going from, I started out, like I'd mentioned, with the Barclay World Mastercard. Then I moved up to the Capital One Venture Rewards. This was before, of course, they had the Capital One Venture X Rewards credit card, which I wish they had then.
Sure,
But
yeah.
I moved up to that, and when I was starting to apply from that, I didn't have my credit history. I just didn't have a lot, right? I had some bills in college from Chantel, if you remember that classic,
Oh,
and
yeah.
but
Man, that takes me back.
yeah, right. But like that was really the longevity of me building up credit. I was having to build up my credit score. So when I started to look at, the different cards, more of the premium cards, looking at it would say, hey, this is where we usually are going to, or we're going to approve or deny you. And it was just off the top of my head, sometimes it could be 650 to 690. It could be 690 to 850. So like you had said, don't just say, oh, I want to go, get the highest one. Maybe it's the Amex right platinum. And I have no chance at that because I'm fresh out of college. And that carries, right, this large annual fee. So it is strategically trying to outline, right, what's best for your personal. Are you traveling a lot? Are you a family that spends a lot of money on groceries? Are you, eating like whatever that is? And that's the beauty of it. There's so many different ways. It isn't what is the hottest card on Instagram. There's always going to be really good welcome bonuses that, experts like us share. But I think that's the biggest thing is focus on what's most important to you and have your financial or house in check.
Mm.
The foundational pieces are going to be most key, and that's the nice thing is places like Fortune, places like myself, on our websites we have our top cards and give deeper dives into those.
Yeah, absolutely. And something I think you touched on there, Ross, is when you're new to all of this, a lot of times the cards that catch your attention are just the ones where the marketing is effective, right? Maybe you see a Cap One commercial on the television, or maybe you see Amex advertising one of their cards as you're walking through the airport. And that may tell you, hey, this card is out there and it's got these flashy perks. It doesn't necessarily tell you, does this card match with where I am in my journey? And so once you dive in a little bit more and you start to understand, okay, these are some of the best options for someone whose credit profile fits mine, for someone whose score is similar to mine, for someone whose length of credit history is similar to mine. That lets you be a little bit more intentional and not just jump at whatever is being marketed to you.
Yeah, I mean, Capital One does a great job. I feel like their commercials, the Capital One guys at the Capital One Bowl, he's with Derek Jeter. He's
Oh yeah,
he's all over the place. They got marketing down to a T. I'll give him that.
you
But
know, oh, I'm sorry to
no,
interrupt you,
no,
but
no, no. Go ahead.
I think my personal favorite these days is I always enjoy Samuel L. Jackson on the baking podcast. Have you seen
Yeah,
that one?
yeah. But they've done it, and yeah, I mean, they had Samuel L. Jackson. They've always done a really good job of marketing. But no,
Yep.
you bring up a great point. It's always going back to right, what's going to fit your profile, what and also like what is your personal situation. And I actually had a close friend who, they understand our strategy around our upcoming wedding, how we've strategically planned, our honeymoon using different credit cards that we have and a couple ones that we signed up for. And then also paying for that from 2023, 2024 expenses, strategically outlining, right? If we're going on a bigger group trip, right? I'm paying for the Airbnb. So I'm getting 3 to 4x the points if we have bigger dinners, right? So doing those type of strategies, but also as we were planning for the wedding, outlining, hey, where is our hotel block? Where are we staying in Thailand and Bali? If it's a Hyatt, we're going to get the Hyatt card, IHG,
Hmm.
right? And that's then paid for other vacations down the line. But I think it's thinking about those types of strategies and your personal situation because it wouldn't make sense for me to open up a Marriott card because we're not staying at a Marriott, right? So it's if you travel for work and your corporation or company lets you pay with your personal card and you like to stay at Marriott's, that's a great example and what one of my coworkers used to do. But it's always just going back to what is your personal situation and what's going to make the most sense for you and your family.
Oh
If you,
yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of attention on sort of the flashier redemptions, right? I think they're popular on TikTok and Instagram, and everybody loves to see how you can, fly business class or get to the Maldives or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that. If that's what you're looking for and you can make that work, absolutely go for it. But I think that it's important to understand that there's sort of an opportunity cost, right? Even quote unquote free travel isn't really free. And we can dive into that a little bit more, what I mean by that. But in this specific context, if you are spending your points for one thing or you're saving them up for something, then there's something else that you're not using them for. And so figuring out what travel looks like for your lifestyle is so important to doing this effectively. Someone that I've worked with both in my time at Fortune and in my time at Forbes Advisor is Dia Adams. And I think you're going to be talking with her a little bit later on this podcast. And she's got a great story about using, I think it was choice privileges points to book a hotel for her son's graduation. That's not fancy. It's not flashy. It's back in actually our old stomping grounds of Southwest Virginia. But it was a perfect redemption for her life. And, prices had skyrocketed leading up to the graduation ceremony. So when she told me that, I'm like, I love that because those are the stories that you don't hear on TikTok so
yeah.
much, but it's a very practical way to use these rewards.
Yeah, yeah, no, I heard that story on an episode that she did. I can't remember who it was with, but it was an interview, and I was like, that is so true because it is right. College graduation, everyone like it's impossible to find a hotel. There, Southwest Virginia, usually it's like sub $100 a night to stay there, and then it's 800 or whatever. So it is very true, and being able to just sit down. One thing that we do, and like 2025 is already planned. Our travel's booked, or it's all paid for with points. Obviously, there's some taxes and fees, like you mentioned, but it's It is. I mean, it's important to focus on. It's just always going back to you and not getting that scope creep of what's hot on Instagram, what's hot here. There's a lot of very valuable information, but it's always just thinking too, like, okay, if I do have questions, right, and I know someone who might be an expert, whether that's Glenn, whether that's Ross, whether that's Dia, Caroline, other people in the industry, going to that person because they can tell you. And I just had a conversation with a good friend who she was like, yeah, I'm, I mean, one of probably the biggest player in the space, the points guy. Like she's like, I'm subscribed to his newsletter. I know they always have this stuff, but I've been looking at it since 2022, and I couldn't justify the annual fee. And I started laughing. And I go, here, I'm going to send you a 5 minute voice message, and this is going to explain everything. And I go, I probably have probably around $900 in annual fees, but those are all paid for with the benefits that I use, right? Maybe it's through different Lyft, because I use Lyft a lot. Maybe it's through Dash Pass. Maybe it's through the free night certificates with those, right? Maybe it's from some of the welcome offers, things like that. Maybe it's through the travel. Maybe it's through Priority Pass, right? The lounge, not paying for food. So yeah, I mean, but just giving that guidance. And if you are listening, going to someone who is that who does this, because at the end of the day, people like us can help you understand like this is what's personally going to be best for you. And it doesn't have to be that one that has this. It could be one that has $0 annual fee, but it's going to fit your lifestyle for where you're at.
Yeah, absolutely. Doing that math, making sure that the rewards and benefits work for you, that's so important. Making sure that if there is an annual fee, that you're getting more in value than you're paying for that annual fee. Something I would mention as far as credits, sometimes you run into some breakage with credits. So let's say, for example, that maybe you've got a $120 per year dining credit, but maybe it's actually broken up as $10 per month. And so what you have to ask yourself is not, am I going to spend $120 per year? It's, am I going to spend $10 per month? Because those are different patterns of behavior. And so whether you're getting the full value out of the perks is going to come down to how well that fits with how you're already spending. I think that there are some cards that align very well with my own lifestyle. I looked at my budget and made the determination that I spend a lot on groceries and restaurant dining, and so those are the cards that I prioritize in my own lineup. But it comes back to being intentional and knowing what your lifestyle looks like.
Yeah, 100%. I always laugh because whenever we would go on our group snowboarding trips, whenever we'd go out to dinner, there's always the people who have one card who are like grabbing their wallets as quickly as possible. And then we get to groceries and they're slamming down like you can't even, they're like getting in front of the line. They're like, nope, I'm getting 4 or 5 times the point. So it's always funny. And you start to learn those types of things, right? As
Mm,
you travel more with people. But I think just since we're on the topic of like beginners, right?
mm.
What are some of the, best practices for just building up a good credit score? I know we've talked about some of it, but are there any other advanced type strategies that you would want to recommend for people?
Yeah, as far as building a good credit score, main thing is always pay on time. Even if that's just the minimum. I know we talked before that you want to pay more than the minimum, which you do, but at least making that minimum payment so you're not falling behind and getting reported late to the credit bureaus. Don't max out your credit limit. Utilization plays a role in your score as well. Spending reasonably in terms of what your credit limit is, always paying on time, always paying it in full if you can. Being strategic about when you apply for new cards, right? I like to apply for a new card with either a great welcome bonus or a 0% intro APR in purchases if I know that we've got a new expense coming up, like maybe we're going to be purchasing plane tickets or maybe we're going to be purchasing appliances, because if I go for the 0% intro period, that lets me have a little bit of breathing room to pay it off without interest charges, as long as I make sure that I pay it off within the intro period.
Mhm.
And if I go for a welcome bonus, that lets me use some big expenditures that I'm already going to need to make anyway to hit that minimum required spend. So being strategic, being intentional, we keep coming back to that because it's a big thing.
It,
Um,
go ahead.
and learning. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, go ahead. You're still going. Keep
Yeah, yeah.
rolling.
Just being strategic about when you apply for new cards, and also learning issuer application rules, right? Chase has their 524 rule. It's unwritten, but it's well known in the industry at this point. And a lot of issuers have something along a similar line. And so if you are applying too frequently, you might be in for an automatic denial. And so just understanding what have I opened recently, and do I have a realistic shot based on that, with this particular card, this particular issue that I'm considering next?
Yeah, yeah, all all great points, and it just going back to what we were talking about, strategy and understanding what do you have coming up, and that's are you another thing? Are you buying a house? Right, that's when like debt to income comes into play, right? Hard credit inquiries. I mean, yeah, I've from being a real estate investor, I know just you got to get your debt to income down sometimes, right? They want credit cards fully paid off. You don't want to apply prior. But like you mentioned, different strategies, and this isn't for everyone, but I know sometimes it's probably smarter to go with ones that have that intro period that aren't, from maybe Value City where you're never going to use that card again, right? Like you can get points that then you can transfer. And we've done that for different houses that we've purchased, from a business standpoint, right? For property management, having one of the business cards, because then you get those once you hit that, if you know you're going to hit that spending threshold, that's another sometimes 75, 100,000 plus points that then you can use for travel, or however you want to spend it. But just those are some of the strategies that I've used just to keep it very basic. And like I talked about from a wedding honeymoon perspective, just mapping that out, and also trips that you might be going on, in the future, and paying, with those specific cards for travel, and maximizing that, and being
Yeah,
and always always, if the nice thing is, since I plan all the trips for friends, I'm always paying, and then they're paying me back, so I'm getting the points. But if you aren't and no one's taking that lead, be that person, because then you get all the points. And then everyone's like, oh, and then you're like, oh, I'll take dinner. So then you're reaping the benefits. So you're kind of getting paid on the back end.
yeah, absolutely. You made a lot of great points there, and I think I'm going to hit on them in sort of reverse order from how you mentioned them. But it's definitely become a running joke in my circle of friends that I'm usually going to be the guy who's like, "Hey, I can put down my card and y'all can Venmo me."
Yep.
And at one point, I actually had a buddy. We were out for sushi, and I had a buddy be like, "Glenn, I want the credit card points this time, so I'm going to pay, and you're going to Venmo me." And I was like, "Okay, man, go for it."
Hey,
Um, but hey, you got to speak up, right?
exactly. And
Um,
you knew you were doing your job, because he realized, like, okay, I'm on to something, and Glenn's on to something.
exactly. Yeah, he got interested in it. But the other thing, one other thing that you mentioned was, store cards versus general purpose cards. And me personally, I will almost always prefer a general purpose card. The store cards will try to bring you in with what seems like a big discount offer, but then you look at the rewards and the redemption options are usually quite limited. The interest rates are quite high. Again, you never want to carry a balance and incur interest anyway, but it's still worth noting that the interest rates are not attractive on those type of products a lot of times. And I would almost always rather earn either cash back that I can just redeem into my bank account or for a statement credit, or travel rewards that I can transfer. I'm so proud of my wife because she'll tell me, yeah, I was at the mall and I was shopping at this clothing store or that clothing store, and they asked me, "Do you want a store card?" And I told them, "No, my husband wouldn't like if I open a store card." She knows that we want the bigger fish. We want the Chase Ultimate Rewards points, for example.
I love it. That's
And
too
yeah,
funny.
yeah. But the other thing that you made a great point about is, are you buying a house, right? Where are you in your financial life cycle? And that was something that we had to take into consideration when we purchased a home back in September. You're absolutely right. You want to put applications on hold for a little bit. You don't want to be racking up new inquiries. And paying off debt absolutely matters. It was actually really interesting for me as someone in the personal finance space, that was the first time I went through a mortgage application, and the lender that we ended up going with, the loan officer actually came back to me and said, "Hey, because you're carrying this credit card debt," and to be clear, it was in a 0% period. So, it's what I consider um, debt that is not harmful because I've got a plan to pay it off, and I'm not paying interest on it. But from the mortgage application perspective, the loan officer told me, "Hey, you are scoring one tier below our highest tier because you've got that debt. If you pay that off and you get a letter from the issuer verifying that you paid it off, I can rescore you and we can see if that bumps you up into the higher tier." Lo and behold, it did. That helped with our rate. So um, it comes back again to being intentional.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. Yeah. We could be on here for a while if I
For
just
sure.
from real estate transactions. But I think, if that's a great point. If if you are planning to buy a house, right? Maybe not opening that, maybe waiting till after. Understanding too, is that house, if it's a primary, is that, if you're turning something into a rental, are you going to be a property manager? For example, my fiance has a washer and dryer, a dishwasher, a fridge that are all like at that age that are probably going to be need to be replaced here shortly. So it's like just strategically mapping out, okay, what are the best, since it is a rental and it is a business, what are the best
Hmm.
business cards? And I think that's where a lot of people, and there's misconceptions too, is you have to have this massive business in order to have that. And no, you don't. If you have something that is, if it's a rental, if it's, you do side hustle, freelance work, whatever that may be, and you are starting to build out that business, you can go to the bank. You don't have to have an LLC. A lot of the times they'll take your social security number, and that's a lot of the times that's how you can. But that's obviously if you're using it for business purposes. But I think that's a big misconception that I get questions a lot about from friends, like I didn't know about until a couple of years ago, and until starting if some of my own businesses. So that's definitely something I wanted to mention as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. Now a couple of caveats that I always like to mention when the topic turns to business cards. For one thing, consumer cards, personal cards tend to have a little bit more in the way of protections than business cards do. So just make sure you understand the terms if you're getting a business card. The other thing being, as you mentioned, yeah, you do want to be using it for business expenses, but your point is absolutely right. A lot of folks may think, oh, I need to have an LLC or something, where a lot of issuers will actually consider you if you have a side hustle. Maybe you sell things on Etsy, maybe you write freelance articles. And in a lot of cases, what that means is you are a sole proprietor.
Yeah, yeah. No, thanks for touching on that. Are there any? I mean, do you think there's any, like when starting out? Do you even if it's not credit cards, right? Are there specific places you like to send people just from a personal finance education standpoint? If like they're like, hey, look, I don't even want to get started with credit cards yet. I need to kind of get my house in order, understand a little bit more about that. Like, what are some of your go-tos?
Yeah, obviously the first most foundational place is just making sure you have a budget. Um, Now, us personally, we're old school. We have a spreadsheet, and every time we make a purchase at the end of the day, we take a look at that receipt and we log it into the spreadsheet. We've broken it out, in terms of our major spending categories. So that's a very manual way to do it. Works for us. But there's plenty of apps out there if you want to make it a little bit more automated. If you want to have something that you can make it easier to share with a partner, for example. I was a big user of Mint back in the day. Of course, that got retired, so rest in peace.
Yeah.
Switched over to Quick and Simplify after that, and even though we're doing the bulk of our budgeting in an old-fashioned spreadsheet, just having Simplify there as a place that I've got an overview of all of my cards and accounts, that's helpful because I can say, oh, yeah, our Microsoft Office billed to this one card over here, and it makes sure that I never miss a payment, for
Yeah.
example.
Nice. Have you, because I know we use Monarch Money. Have you used them at all?
Not familiar. Does it work for you guys?
Yeah, yeah, we like it. It's similar to what you were saying, right? You can attach, right, if it's whether it's credit cards, whether it's, your personal bank account, and it shows kind of bills that are coming in, whatnot. You also can kind of track net worth, things like that, if you put in any real estate investments, stock investments. But I feel like we don't really track that stuff in there. It's more just, hey, if we have combined expenses, then it helps around that. And I think it is helpful for people maybe if they're getting married or they're starting to combine finances, like having maybe one card that or two that, if you're strategically mapping it out for right, maybe restaurants or travel, but having that helps you then kind of get aligned. So it isn't, oh, Venmo me this, Venmo me that. And then you're like, okay, where's the cash coming in and out of? So it's definitely been helpful for us as a couple.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that I think these sorts of softwares are really useful for is as you get more into credit cards, you've got a lot of open accounts potentially. And so catching if there is a card that you haven't used in a while and there's a balance on there, that tells you, hey, go log in, check that, make sure it's not fraud. We actually had a case like that a little while back on one of our Amex cards, and thankfully, caught it almost immediately. Reported it. We weren't liable for it, but if we weren't vigilant about monitoring, where do all of our accounts stand, that could have gone unnoticed for quite some time and become a problem.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And it also helps with the, oh crap, I might have a payment that's due, but I can't remember if it's that $5 automatic payment to Spotify or Netflix, and I don't want to get dinged because I missed a $5 payment. So yeah, that's one other way. No,
Exactly.
that's great. And then I mean, you're obviously in the know, right? You do this day in, day out. What trends are you seeing right now just emerging in the credit card industry that people should be aware of?
Yeah, this is that's a perfect segue. So thank you for setting me up so well. But something I wanted to make sure we talk about is I mentioned earlier, free travel isn't
Yes.
free, right? And because of how popular card rewards are and how popular that content has become on social media, I think it's really important to emphasize that. When you redeem points for an airline ticket, you're still going to have to pay taxes and fees. And even if you cover the bulk of your flight and your hotel with points and miles, you're still going to have to pay for food. You're still going to have to pay for, maybe cab fare or getting an Uber or Lyft. And so just making sure that you're still budgeting for these trips is so important. I'm sure you're bearing that in mind as you plan the wedding.
Oh yeah.
These rewards can definitely offset the cost of the trip, but there's still some things that come out of your pocket too. And so just being smart for that can ensure that you're going somewhere fun, you're doing it affordably, but you're also not letting the thrill of quote unquote free travel make you spend above your budget.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I mean, that's something that I mean, from our point of view, like we've saved up a lot of points. We're flying, Qatar Q Suites business, which I'm excited about. I mean, it's great marketing, obviously, but
Hmm.
it's the amount that we're paying in taxes and fees, it's probably to go to Bangkok and back from Bali. I mean, it's 700 bucks.
Right.
Maybe so it's right. So it's not free, but it's offsetting, right? That, 16,000 $16,000 price tag, which is great.
Hmm.
And then you're able to stay at some nice hotels, that are highs, but then you're paying in cash for some that
Hmm.
is fine. And when you are going on trips, obviously if it's a honeymoon, you're going to want to stay at nicer places. But if you're going just on, hey, this is our trip of the year and you can use points and miles, sometimes it is, hey, okay, we'll stay here on these, but if we don't have it, we can stay at an Airbnb that's just gets the job done. But you are having to pay for food. You are having to. So I think after you and I had that conversation, it was really helpful for me because you do see a lot of stuff online that's like free travel. And I've transitioned into, no, it's helped pay for travel, right? It
Hmm.
helps pay for our travel. It's not free, And it's not like we're just getting all this free stuff. No, we're having to spend a decent amount of money. For anyone who's planning a wedding, it's not cheap, and we're having to spend a decent amount of money, but not doing it on debit to then pay that back and reap the rewards is definitely has been helpful. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the way that you're approaching it is so smart. I like what you said. It helps us pay for travel,
mhm.
because that's absolutely how I look at it as well. And that also helps you think through, where do I leverage my points and miles versus what do I pay for in cash?
Yeah.
I think something we talked about at our first meetup is sometimes it's actually cheaper to pay the cash price. Let's say that you use points and miles to get to Europe, and then you want to go somewhere within Europe. You may be able to find a very low cost flight for cash, because you are flying within the EU. So just being strategic about when it's worth shelling out those points versus when you're better to just budget the cash for it, I think is an important part of this strategy. And then the other thing I was going to say, you mentioned, credit card versus debit. Funny story about, Glenn way back before he got into personal finance. First time I went to Europe, I was a baby. I didn't know anything. Not a literal baby. I was in college. Um, but I used my debit card for everything. And eventually I started noticing, hey, what are these little charges for, like, 30 cents, 70 cents? That was my education on a foreign transaction fee right there.
There you go. It happens. Hey, at least it wasn't you went and this wasn't me, but this was a story that they told us before we studied abroad. Make sure you talk with your parents and cell phone and all of that, so you're not coming back and having like a 2 grand cell phone bill and your parents
Yep.
are pissed at you. No, all yeah, I mean all great points. But yeah, foreign transaction fees, that's always look into that because there are some cards that don't, and that goes also back to if you are traveling international, you want to know that. And for people who, you know, and I think one point that you bring up is when people do travel internationally or they haven't, a lot of times people think, since if they've only traveled domestically, oh my gosh, once I get over there, it's going to be now it costs $300 in cash to fly from Charlotte to Ohio, right? So it's like people think it's going to cost that much, but it really doesn't. You can find cheap flights that are anywhere from, sometimes 30 to $100. You just got to make sure that you know the baggage restrictions because some of those places will be like you only can have X amount of weight or it has to be smaller. So those those are definitely things that you want to keep in mind. Like we paid 30, $40 for flights when we were in Thailand. So it is very affordable and just like deciding, does it make sense to spend 150,000 points to go to Greece, or does it make sense to save those, pay in cash, $700, and then use those for a bigger trip where it's a full day of flying versus, getting extra legroom on an overnight trip.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a little bit tangential, but a couple of things that came to mind just listening to you say that. One is learning about, if you're near a hub. For example, for us, Charlotte is a big American Airlines hub. And so I will frequently prioritize if I have the opportunity to earn American Airlines miles because I can use those so easily. You also learn about airline alliances, right? And travel partners. So, for example, using Chase Ultimate Rewards points to book through, I think it was Virgin Atlantic for a Delta flight. Learning those alliances can really help you stretch your points and miles further.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's, I posted something last week and I had a bunch of people reach back out just to friends who are like, this was super helpful, but it's just like, British Airways, right? That is then part of the Avios program, which, Iberia, Qatar, you also have Finnair. So there's a lot of different Aer Lingus. So like then you can start to think, oh, I can go to Spain. I could also go to Finland. I could also go to Dublin, right? And then Qatar, that's, if you're trying to go to Southeast Asia or really anywhere that helps. So just understanding British Airways is not just flying to London, right? There's plenty of transfer partners. You can use different points, miles from different credit card transfers to do that. And being in Charlotte, understanding that because I mean, for example, when we're going to Grand Cayman, when we're going to Punta Cana, like we're using British Airways miles Alaska also, Alaska Airlines now is a
Hmm.
great one. And since that's also part of Avios, like you can use that and you can find flights sometimes for like 4,000 points on Alaska. And I know they just came out with a pretty good credit card that can get you. So it's thinking about, where are you going? If you're staying stateside, maybe it's looking into things like that. But those are just some high level tips and tricks. And I know I'll be getting into more details around those in some solo episodes as well as when I have some more guests coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. All great points.
Well, cool. Well, I guess I would be interested. Like, what are you most excited before we wrap up? What are you most excited for, whether it's personally, whether it's professionally, whether it's credit cards, personal finance? What are you most excited for the rest of this year?
Yeah, yeah, man. We got a trip coming up in a few weeks. We're gonna spend some time visiting some relatives in Eastern Europe, and like you and I talked, I am a big foodie. There is a dumpling place that we went to the last time we were over there that I just cannot wait to go back. I was joking to my wife. I said, "Yeah, I mean, look, it's nice to see family, but I'm there for the dumplings."
Where are you headed?
We're gonna go to Tallinn, Estonia, spend a week there.
Nice, nice. Well, when we make our trek over there, I know exactly to who to who to call for dumplings.
Oh yeah, man. I will text you the link to this place. It's transformational. They do all the standard stuff, the beef and pork, but they also get real fancy with it. You want duck dumplings, they got you. You want wild boar, you want bear, they got you.
I'm already hungry. We were looking up food for our honeymoon last night and we're like we are so ready to be done cooking, cleaning, all of this. Like we just want to go chill and eat.
Yep, yep. I don't blame you at all.
Nice, man. Well, hey, where can our listeners find you?
Yeah, go to fortune.com. The personal finance section is real easy to find from the homepage. You'll see my work there and also that of some other great journalists. I appreciate you taking the time to talk this through with me. I think it's really important because financial education is so crucial to, just having the freedom to live your life the way that you want. So I think this is important stuff that you're educating folks on.
Well said. Yeah. No, I appreciate it and appreciate you coming on. And for our listeners, if this is your first time, make sure you hit that follow button. That way you don't miss out on great experts like Glenn. If you want to give us a 5 star, if you think we deserve it, hopefully you do. Make sure you give us a 5 star rating and review. That helps us reach more people who are trying to travel, learn about rewards as well as personal finance. And we'll look forward to tuning in and bringing another episode to you next week. Really appreciate you coming on, Glenn. Thanks again.
Thank, thanks, Ross. I enjoyed it.